Okay, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our prayer today is Psalm 66. Shout joyfully to God, all the earth. Sing of his glorious name. Give him glorious praise. Say to God, how awesome your deeds. Before your great strength, your enemies cringe. All the earth falls in worship before you. They sing of your name. Come and see the works of God, awesome in deeds before the children of Adam. He changed the sea to dry land. Through the river they passed on foot. There we rejoice in him who rules by his mighty forever. His eyes are fixed upon the nations. Let no rebel rise to challenge. Bless our God, you peoples. Loudly sound his praise, who has kept us alive and not allowed our feet to sleep. You tested us, O God, tried us as silver tried by fire. You led us into a snare. You bound us at the waist as captives. You let captors set foot on our neck. We went through fire and water. Then you led us out to freedom. In the name of the Father, Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I think that kind of answers a little the question. And we see God. Alrighty. So we started chapter 16. So what is happening now? As we said, the people of Israel, they've seen the great actions of God and they were delivered. And all of a sudden, they start complaining. There's a crisis in the desert. Why? Because, they go through the desert. They have to walk in the heat. They have no water. They have very little food. So, of course, they won't be happy. Right? So what is happening there? Chapter 16. And this has happened 6 weeks after the Exodus. We know it because the book of Numbers gives us exactly the date later on. So it's 6 weeks after Exodus, they will already start complaining. So they've been in a desert for 6 weeks. So it can get to you. So now they start murmuring, murmuring, lack of faith. Remember this murmuring thing. They don't speak in Moses' face. They talk behind his back. Look how poor, what kind of leader is that? All those things. That's the murmuring. That's the worst thing that can happen to us. So, that we have died by the hand, verse 3, and said to them, would you that we have died by the land of Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pot and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out in the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. And again, this whole idea that slavery and, let's say, full plates are more important than freedom and going and being responsible for your own actions. So then the Lord, verse 4, so again, they tell Moses, we would rather die of natural causes by the hand of the Lord in Egypt, but have our food and everything else, so give us something to eat. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them. So this day portion every day is a test. Why is that important? Well, because you have to remember how much you have to trust. That you know that the only food that you will have is just for that day. You don't know if it's going to be there tomorrow. You have to trust. So you see, it's an ultimate testing because, that I'm not sure how many of us can live like that. That only thing that you have is today. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, if you're going to have food or not. God's promise, we're supposed to be trusting, but how many of us can trust like that? Again, this is God is testing people. God is shaping them into these new nations so that they could be, let's say, free, so that they will not have this slave mentality. So that's why it is the first test. On the 6th day, verse 5, when they prepare what they bring it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses said to the sons of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see, your translation has the glory of God. The better it's kabod, which will be the presence of God. In the morning you will see the presence of the Lord, because he has heard you murmuring against the Lord. For what are we that you murmur against us? And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard you murmuring which you murmur against him. What are we? You murmuring are not against us, but against the Lord. How many times is this murmur? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Of course, it has to be 7. Why 7? Because again, they are so perfect in complaining that they do it in the best way, possible. That's why it's 7. So then the glory of the Lord appeared to them in a cloud. And verse 12, I have heard the murmuring of the sun. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Remember, that's their complaint, that they had pots full of flesh and bread to its fullness. So that's how that's what God will give them. So in the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as hoarfrost on the ground. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? Which in Hebrew would be manhu. That's why manna comes from, manhu. For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of info every day, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about the quails and manna. Are those natural phenomena? Yes. There will be, quails are traveling through the desert, through Sinai, going up north from Africa all the time. It's about timing. It's all about timing. God gave them food where they needed it. What is manna, the manhu? It's a substance that they gather. It's not bread itself. They bake bread out of it. Okay, so it's something that they can make bread out of.
So it's like a grain or something?
Some kind of... People are trying to explain it in 1,000 different possibilities. Some people said it will be like a raisin that is on tamarisk tree. Some other people said it will be insect doo-doo, things like that, and different things. We don't know what it was. That's why the name is, what is it? What is it? We don't know. It was something that fed them for 40 years. But you see what the problem with that is. Imagine eating the same thing day in and day out for 40 years. You're going to get tired of it. You have to prepare it, and then, again, you have only gathered enough for a day. Because if you have leftovers, they spoil. They rot. So you cannot really gather. Only on Shabbos, on Friday, you gather for 2 days, because there is no work on Shabbos. So you have to prepare that food, that bread, you have baked bread on Friday, before Friday evening. So there is this, when you look at that, it is not easy for them. So I don't wonder why they murmur, why they complain all the time. Because, if I had to eat the same food for 40 years every day, I wouldn't be too happy, right? Especially working in the desert and so on. And so there is a reason for them to complain. But yet, you see, that's why God does not get angry with them. Like later on with the golden calf, God will get very angry. Over here, God is not getting angry on their complaints. God understands their complaints. But God will provide for them. So, is complaining wrong? Well, if you complain all the time. So we have that. Again, but it's not just those quails in the manna. It tells us about this absolute dependence on God. Because you totally depend on God. They had their animals that they had with them from Egypt and so on. But remember, you don't eat too much of, let's say, animal meat at this time. They will eat that meat only maybe 3 times a year. Why? Because it takes forever to raise an animal, and when there is not much grass in Sinai, which is not much, and so on, you have also your animals will not be too fat, put it that way. So it's a very scarce resources that you have. And yet, that's why they have totally rely on God. God is telling them, you were slaves, you rely on your masters, on Pharaoh, now you have to rely on me, and I will make you free. I will free you from your shortcomings. So then, verse 22, on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers apiece, and when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is the day of solemn rest, a holy Shabbat to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay to be kept till the morning. So they did so and so on. And what is happening on the seventh day? Of course, some people will not listen. So on the seventh day, verse 27, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain every man of you in his place. Let no one go on his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. That's another thing that we teach. Remember, they're slaves. They did not keep Sabbath in Egypt. So now they have to learn to rest. They learn that they're not slaves anymore, that they have right to rest. Because that's why later on when Moses will give them the laws, Moses will be very clear. On Sabbath day, even your slaves are resting. Even your animals are resting. Nobody works on Sabbath. It's a holiday to the Lord. So why is that important for us? Well, what we do on Sundays when it is the day of the Lord. How many of us that do work, or we, let's say we rest, but then we get more tired after that rest that we do than, from working. So it is this idea about keeping the day holy, the holiday holy. We're not slaves, okay? Rest is part of God's plan. We will get to that later on once we get to Sinai, because Moses will be talking about that over and over again. But it's a holy. Shabbat is what makes the Jews Jews. That's what makes us Christians. That's why we're supposed to make this day holy. So we're supposed to, let's say, celebrate it a little differently than any other days of the week. So it's important to keep the holidays rest. And it's also this whole idea of 7th day. It shows people of Israel and the Jewish people that God is totally independent of nature. Remember, how do we, let's say, measure time? Usually you got solar year and lunar year, right? And those people, they follow those two calendars, solar and lunar. The 7-day week has nothing, let's say, that you can follow in nature. Okay? It's an arbitrary day off that God says this is day off that you have to keep. There's no other measures and so on. So, because again, some lunar months will have 28 days. Some of them, but not all of them. So there's a different length of lunar calendar. The solar calendar is the same way, different days. The week is arbitrary decision of God. This is how we rest. The 7th day is a day of rest. Because you have to remember, in ancient times, like in Egypt and in Babylon, they will have every 15 to 18 days like a feast, when they will go to the temple, they will celebrate, have some fast and so on. The thing, like every single week we have a day off, that's unheard of. This is the total revolution that God is presenting to the people of Israel. And this is very important, because then that's how we know that you're Jewish, right? Circumcision, you keep Sabbath, and you keep kosher. And those three things keep the whole history of salvation running. So it's important of that. So now the house of Israel called its name manna, verse 31, again reintroduction of that. And they said later on, and Moses said to Aaron, verse 33, take a jar and put an omer of manna in the ark and place it before the Lord to be kept through your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the covenant to be kept. And the son of Israel ate the manna 40 years till they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. And then it is footnote, an omer is the 10th part of an ephah.
What does that mean?
Omer is the measure, it's basically handful. That's the omer. I think that's what they said. So it's at 1/10 of the ephah. So you will get this omer for each person. So that's a handful of that manna that you will get to eat for the day. Not much. Okay, what can you have? Some of the bigger hands, you might have it. But it's not much food. It's a total dependence on God. That's what is so important. So then they eat, and then chapter 17, all the congregation of the sons of Israel move on from the wilderness of sin by stages according to the commandments of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people found fault with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said to them, why do you find fault with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst?" What is this expression, found fault? It's better will be grumble. I think that's the translation, better translation. It is like an official judicial complaints. That's what it is. So they are basically, for a change with water, they do present Moses with an official case almost. We got dying of thirst. You need to do something. So Moses did. Massah and Meribah. So he comes in, verse 5. Pass on before the people, taking with you some elders of Israel, and take in your hand the rod with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock of Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water shall come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the fault finding of the sons of Israel, and because they put the Lord to the test by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So some people will say again, it's had nothing miraculous in it. Moses they just knew that there was certain places of the rock when you struck it, the water will flow out. That's not what it says. It's a miracle. And also, this rock of Massah and Meribah is, later on we see that book of Leviticus, this rock will be following Israelites through the desert. So they will always have fresh running water. They will never run out of water. Okay? So that's later on when you look at book of Leviticus, that's what it says, that the rock follows them. Actually, you can also check on Psalm 78 about the rock following Israelites to the desert. So there's another one. And then we have verse 8 to 15. It's a great reading, especially when you read it on Sunday in the church. Amalek's, people again, there is a tribe in the desert, the Bedouins, they see those, let's say, runaway slaves going through the desert. What they're going to do? They're going to attack them. They're going to rob them because they want that food and everything else. So Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men and go out, fight with the Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat upon it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other one on the other side. So his hands were steadily up until going down of the sun. And Joshua mown down Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. We'll see the same story later on retold in book of Deuteronomy when Moses retells the story. But it's again this whole idea about, it's not about magic, holding hands in the air, okay? What is all about? Why this whole idea? The rabbis will say that as long as Israelites saw Moses praying, they had strength to fight. Remember, those are slaves. They don't know how to fight. All they know is how to make bricks and build. They have no idea how to fight. And they are fighting Bedouins, which are, they're seasoned warriors. So they see Moses praying, and that gives them strength and gives them courage to fight. How that works, why they will have to put it, again, this whole idea about Aaron and Hur keeping Moses' hands so that he could sit down and, just to keep praying. Again, it's an importance of prayer, but also it shows Moses' humanity. Because Moses cannot just do anything. He just brought the manna and quails. He just struck the rock with water. Moses might have let's say, believing his own press releases, like some politicians do. They believe that they can do miracles, right? So this is also to show both Israelites and Moses that they're human, that they need God. Again, this total dependence on God will be over and over again.
It's interesting you should say that, because you're reading Moses' conviction and faith. I was starting to perhaps build him up more as we're reading this, and you just put him back to human. It's just interesting that you should make that comment.
Because
my own mind building him up.
Yeah, because that also will be later on Moses' problem. That's why he will not be allowed to enter the Holy Land, because he will do exactly the thing that he will think that he can bring that water. and he will be punished for that. So there is this human part to him that he needs to be reminded over and over again. Okay? An Israelite. So, verse 14, and the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out remembrance of Amalek from under the heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name on it, the Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the banner of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So this whole idea about, again, it's God's doing, it's not mine. Now, we have Moses' father-in-law coming to visit his son-in-law. And what is happening there? He sees what he's doing. Moses is sitting in judgment because, again, people are complaining and fighting. So Moses is the one who is listening to every single case. And he goes on throughout the whole day, throughout the entire day. At the end of the day, everybody is tired. Because imagine standing in line for someone to judge your case, to argue, listen to the disputes and things like that. You get tired. It gives you reason to murmur, to complain. So when Moses, verse 14, when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand about you from morning till evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between a man and his neighbor, and I make them know the statute of God and his decision. Moses' father-in-law said to him, what are you doing is not good. Okay? So you cannot lead alone, you cannot lead alone. Remember when in book of Genesis when God is bringing woman to man and he says it's not good for man to be alone. So what you're doing is not good. So here that's you cannot lead alone. He's giving the same expression. So what he's telling him, make sure that you find the men of Israel. Verse 24. So Moses gave heed to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and make them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and of tens. Did you notice something? He is not picking tribal leaders. He's picking capable men. So it's all of a sudden, we kind of get rid of this tribal distinction, tribal division. All of a sudden, whoever is a judge will be judging not only over his own tribe, but over thousands of people. So that's why this is a change in Torah in Israel that is, let's say, the tribal allegiance is not that important anymore. What is important is the nation, judging of the nation. That's why he's getting rid of, he's kind of restructuring the whole tribe association group. So then we go to chapter 19. So this is a great chapter, especially since we came back from Sinai not far long ago. So on the third new moon, after the sons of Israel had gone forth out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. And when they set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, they encamped in the wilderness, and there Israel encamped before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptian, and how I bore you on eagle's wings. I brought you to myself, is the expression. I bore you on eagle's wings. We'll hear that later on in Isaiah, in other prophets. But this whole idea that, again, God was doing everything. On eagle's wing, they were soaring over their enemies. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my own possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and holy nation. This is the mission statement for nation of Israel. Mm-hmm. Obey my voice, hear my covenant, keep my covenant, you be my own possession, you will be kingdom and priests and holy nation. So again, people of Israel are being chosen to bring God into humanity, and they are basically representing God to the humanity. So they say that's why it's called priests and holy nation. They're not better than anybody else. They're supposed to be holy, not better. Okay? That is the whole idea. And then later on we'll hear that they're always talking, you have been chosen not because you are special. You have been chosen because I have chosen you. That's why you're holy, because you keep the commandments. So holiness comes from God's choice, but also our response and our, let's say, listening to God's voice and following and keeping His commandments. That's how we become, again, the chosen people and the priestly nation, as they call it. Because what they do, what does priest do in the congregation? So he makes, let's say, God's presence right on the altar, but his priest is chosen from among the people. That's why there's this right at the beginning of the rite of ordination. There is a representative of the community that presents a priest to be ordained to the archbishop. Usually the wording is more or less like, by listening to the words of formators and community, I will present you, bishop, with this man to be ordained priest. So community chooses its priest. Priest represents God to the people, but also he makes him present, and it's intermediary in between, and also does all the teaching. Right? That's another part of the being a priest in Israel, and offering sacrifice, teaching, and making God's presence, let's say, present to the people. So that's the thing. Yeah, that's what we do. So this is the mission statement. And here you have the people of how they respond. When you look at that, verse 7. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and said before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said. So here is one of those moments when the Israelites are living up to their call. Because all of them, not only some of them, all of them respond. All that Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses reported these words of the people to the Lord. He goes back and forth. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. So then Moses is telling people, he's telling them, wash, get the garment, get ready for the third day. Why the third day? Because always on the third day, that's when God starts acting. So God will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, and you shall set bounds for the people, meaning don't go too close to the mountain. And verse 15, it's interesting part. And he said to the people, be ready by the third day, do not go near a woman. Okay, why? Because sex is not sacred. Sex is mundane. It's just the daily part of daily life. Why is that important? That the priests, they would be kept, when they were going to the temple, they have to stay 3 days without having sex. And they will have to stay awake at night so that they will not have pollution. There is no. So why is that important? Because remember, all the cultures around Israel, sex is part of their fertility cult. So for Israel, sex will be, it's good because you have to procreate, but it's not part of your worship. It's separation there. So it's this whole strong message that again, changing the way people approach sexuality, approach life. There's nothing wrong with sex, but it's not part of your worship. That's why later on they will tell priests, you cannot go naked before the altar, or you have to wear breeches when you approach the altar so that your nakedness cannot be exposed, and so on and so forth. Again, it's all reference to all those cults of fertility that were present in the Middle East. Everywhere from Egypt all the way till India, even, and all that. So now, what is happening here right now, when you come, Sinai becomes like a sanctuary. You have 3 zones, basically. And those of you who were at Sinai, you've probably seen. The first one is like the outer court of the temple, which is where monastery of St. Catherine is on the foot of the mountain. Then the second part is more or less where the tabernacle would be in the temple. And that's the part from the bottom to the steps of repentance, if you remember that. So that's a tabernacle. And the Holy of Holies is the last 500 something steps.
700 and something.
Painful. Yes. But the very top of the mountain, that's the Holy of Holies. That's why? Because that's where the God becomes present to Moses. And that's when Moses receives 10 commandments. Okay. So it's a division of the in a way, God separates this Mount Sinai into like three zones. Because again, Sinai becomes the sanctuary, because that's where God appears to the people. So what is happening there? Verse 16. On the morning of the third day. Yes.
The temple in Jerusalem, eventually they build the temple in Jerusalem. Does it have like three zones like that?
Yeah.
So this is.
That's what I said. That here it is foreshadowing of the temple. Because then later on, when you read further chapters, the tent of the covenant, the tent when the ark is being held, it's also built the same way. You have outer court, you have sanctuary, and you have holy of holies. There's three zones. When anybody can enter the outer court. The second part, only priests can enter, and Jewish men. And the third one, it's only high priest can enter once a year of Day of Atonement. And Moses becomes the priest that enters the Holy of Holies. Okay? And then, so what is happening there? A thick cloud upon the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke of it went up like a smoke of a kiln. And the whole mountain quaked greatly. And at the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. So what we see some powerful thunderstorm going on over there. And again, God is present in that thunderstorm. Earthquake, thunderstorm, everything else. That's why when later on Elijah will run away from Queen Jezebel, once he goes to Mount Sinai, what happens? Earthquake, thunderstorm, fire, and then this quiet, silent breeze. So you see, Elijah's later on, his theophany, his encounter of God will be exactly the same as Moses. So Elijah will have the same experience. That's why later on in the Gospels, what is happening? Mount of Transfiguration, what is happening? Who appears? Moses and Elijah. Why? Because they were the ones who, on Mount Sinai, they encounter God. Now they are in presence of Jesus, who is transfigured. So they encounter God again in the person of Jesus. See, that's why they use those two images, those two people. You need to make connections like that, because that's what they will use. You know, again, the Bible is always commenting on each other, on itself, all the time. So, and then we see the people cannot come on Mount Sinai, for you have charged them, and then go down, come up, bringing Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and people break through, they come to the Lord, and so on and so forth. And God spoke to this world. Let's talk about 10 Commandments, because I think that will be, how much time do we have?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, let's talk about 10 Commandments. First of all, 10 Commandments is not the best translation. Okay? Asher Devarim, which means 10 statements or 10 words. That's the better translation. That's why when they translated it into Greek, they translated it as Decalogue. Decalogos, 10 words. Unfortunately, yes.
But wouldn't commandment carry more than meaning than just words?
Yes, but those are not commandments. Those are statements. Devarim, they're just 10 words. In Hebrew, commandment is mitzvot. That's another word for that. But this is Asher Devarim, 10 words, 10 statements. But when you look at it this way, as a statement that God makes, it actually makes more sense. Because most of those statements they are simple, they are absolute, they are positive and negative. There is no qualifications in them. And this is more like there is no punishment for not keeping. You see, law, when you see commandments, usually there is with the punishment that will do. Those 10 statements, 10 words, there is none. So this is more like God is making statement about how to practice spiritual discipline. I would say this more than anything else. Again, we call them commandments, that's fine. We're not going to change that. But I want you to remember that those are statements that God makes in order to help people in keeping their spiritual discipline. So
But
let's.
but if they don't keep it, they do get state ramifications or punishments.
That's later on. But the 10 words, the 10 main statements, is there is nothing about punishment in them. Actually, there's only one mention. We'll get to that.
Implicit. It's implicit. I'm giving you these 10 words. Call it what you can.
Yeah.
What you want. But if you don't do it, I mean, you know.
There will be repercussions, absolutely. So now let's look at this 10 statement, 10 words, because what is important here is the Jewish 10 statements are a little differently numbered than Christian. Because in the Jewish first 10 statements, the first statement is verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of land of Egypt, out of house of slavery. That's the first statement in Jewish 10 commandments. I put it this way. Okay? So then, why is that important? Again, they need to remember that God liberated them. That's the statement. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, no idolatry, right? Very, very simple. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth beneath or that is in the water on the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God. And this is in our statement, visiting the iniquity of their fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and 1,000 generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So what is going on in here? Again, very simple. No images. Okay, that's the Jewish people, and that's was that absolute? To some extent, yes. But when you look at old, let's say, archaeological excavation in Holy Land, synagogues from 1st century, from 2nd century, or before, there was a representation. There's always some animals. They did, they did not represent humans in their mosaics or things like that, but they were plants and animals. Why? Because those were decoration. Usually they were on the floors. If you remember that synagogue in Capernaum, they were on the floors and so on. So they were just as a decor. So that's why they did not bow to them. They did not worship those images. Why? Because you cannot, again, remember, we're dealing with Middle East. Okay, so people do worship animals. People do worship animals that are representation of their gods. Okay? Even today, you go to India and that's what happened. Something. So there is something in humanity with that. That's why we have Catholics. We have problem, with a big problem. Yes. No, not with that. More with her.
Well, but I'm saying we have images.
Yeah, but we don't worship those images. They're representing those people to us. But there is a problem with certain Marian shrines. Because it becomes, sometimes, for some people, I'm not saying that for all, it becomes like an idol. Best example of that, Medjugorje. It's all about apparition and Mary. Most of the messages. Some messages at the beginning, they weren't that bad. But then later on it became weird. The visionaries will talk on the phone and Mary all of a sudden start chipping in and talking to them on the phone. And it's like, really? It's like, when it quacks like a duck, right? Yeah. So the thing is, we have to be careful with those things. I'm not saying that there is nothing there, because there is a lot of conversions in Medjugorje. I'm not saying there's anything wrong, but there is a problem there. Why? Because apparition itself become an idol. It doesn't lead people to God. It keeps them from getting closer to God. So we have to be very careful. See, and you walk to my office. I have icons all over my office, so I'm guilty as charged. But again, this is different approaches. That those things, they kind of like windows to God rather than mirrors that I can see myself, put it that way. So with all the apparitions and all the different things, be very careful. That's why church only approved 2. Fatima and Lourdes. Only 2 official apparitions of Mary that are being approved by the Holy Universal Church. Everything else is private devotion. Why? Because church knows we need to be careful. So it's nothing wrong. We see Our Lady of Cobre, or we go to Częstochowa in Poland or some other places, that's great if that helps us to grow closer to God. But if that becomes the center and the end of our attention, of our faith life, problem. You know,
Guadalupe too?
Guadalupe is private.
It's private.
Yeah. Still. And again, it's a great message, but church says, okay, this is for the people of Americas. She's a patron of Americas, but it's a private apparition. It's a, let's say, apparition to the church, but it's a private devotion. Nobody can tell you to celebrate that.
Which one is that? What did you say? Guadalupe.
Guadalupe.
I don't get it when you say private. What's the meaning of private?
That your faith does not depend. Let's say the church will not tell you you have to pray to that particular Mary or apparition in order to exercise your faith. Meaning, if you like to, if it helps your faith, that's fine. But church will not tell you that you have to pray through that.
To me, when you pray, it's because you're praying to the Lord.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Because he was in.
Yeah, but you see, I know a lot of people that this blurs the thing. That's why some Protestant brothers will tell us that we worship Mary, because sometimes people do, almost. Now, I don't think that they ever know totally, but there is a danger in that. So we have to be very careful. Because again, if our faith depends on those things, there's a problem. It should help us, help our faith, but it cannot depend on those things.
Mother, how do you explain? I have a friend who went to Medjugorje, and they saw the sun. You know, it spun. More than one saw that, and one had her rosary beads. I think the little chain. A couple of them, they turned to gold. She took them to a jeweler, and they said it was like ancient gold. How do you explain that?
No, but I think it's weird. Why would God wanna, again, if you look in the sun for too long, it's gonna dance. Okay, you're gonna have a little thing. Why would God does not work like that. Why would a rosary change color into gold? There has to be a reason. If that was the reason that woman prays that rosary more, maybe that was the reason. Otherwise, if it sounds too weird, it's too weird. As simple as it is.
Danced, and what was that, Lord? Remember when it was raining? And the sun came out and dried everything up? No? It was falling?
Okay. Remember, the evil one also can perform miracles. And very often, the evil one, in order to deceive people. That's why we have to be careful. I'm not saying, don't go there. I go to every single shrine that I can. But for me, it's a pilgrimage to a place that brings me closer to God, rather than just worshiping, statue and things like that. So if you see that, what was that, Clearwater, Florida, that Mary was weeping? No, she was appearing at the window of Walmart and things like that. People, for crying out loud, And there were thousands of people there. They don't come to Mass on Sunday. They don't come to confession. But they will go to Clearwater, Florida to see the miracles. You see the problem here? We have the greatest miracle of them all, Eucharist. God is present.
Some people will not think.
How people will go to see the apparition in the window of Walmart, but they will not come to church. So you see the problem there, because we do have already what we need. Certain times God intervenes so that we could get closer to Him, but that's again, be very careful. Okay, timing. Let's break. So I know this always stirs up a lot of discussions, but again, we as a church, we tell ourselves, because we are humans, we are physical, so we need something that we can see, touch, and smell. Because if you go to Protestant church or some of the other churches that will go, and all you do is just hear the Bible and then singing, and there's nothing going on, there's a lot of things that are missing. Because when we have in our churches statue, windows, smells and bells, you see that adds into celebration. That's why we do that.
There's no reverence in Protestant churches.
Yeah, that's what it is. So.
Or the stores,
What did you sometimes in your sermon,
churches.
Explain to the congregation what the Mass is about? We do that in North Carolina. And the people loved it.
I do it when there is a reading for that.
Yes, he does. He does a beautiful home.
Okay, so let's look at that. And the one thing I want to explain, we need again, God who is jealous God, and again, it's that's why God gets angry. God has emotions. Emotions are not just our human domain. Remember, God creates us in His image and likeness. So if we have emotions, God has emotions. That's why God is talking about being jealous, being angry. Okay? Why is God jealous? Because God wants, God makes the covenant, meaning it's between you and Him, and it has to be, let's say, like your marriage. It's just, there is no including others in that relationship. So, but it's what is here, it's visiting this iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to 1,000 generations of those who love and keep my commandments. So what does it mean? Basically, that the children of those who are not good, they have much harder time becoming good. Okay? Those of you who ever had the opportunity to work in the hood on barrio, for people who live in those areas, it's very difficult to get out of that cycle. They will try make best choices. Still, it's much more difficult for them than for someone who comes from the good house. That's why, as God says, those people who are not making good moral choices, that will be effect on their children and grandchildren. Okay? They will be affected by that. The same thing, if you do good, that will be they will be affected. So that's basically what it's saying. But again, blessing is on 1,000 generations. The curse is only on 3, so 3 or 4. So it's possible to get out of this vicious cycle. So then 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will hold him guiltless will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Okay, name of the Lord is not to say, oh my God, okay, it's not that. It's the holy name of God, the Tetragrammaton. YHVH, that's what we pronounce. Some people pronounce Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever. That's what they said about using God's name. That's why that name was pronounced. Actually, nobody knows how to pronounce this word. But it was pronounced once a year at the Day of Atonement when priest went into the Holy of Holies. That's when he will pray to God. He will use the holy name of God. But what is more, rabbis will say, but this is what is more probable here. What is, use the name of the Lord of God in vain. It's to use the name of God as an excuse to do the wrong thing. That's the vain. For example, terrorists who blow up themselves in the name of God. See, that's using God's name in vain. If we use religion to justify our bad behavior, because it happens sometimes, right? That's using God's name in vain. Why? Because we profane God's name by using religion and faith when we do something wrong to justify what we do when we do wrong. In church we have crusades, that will be part of it, and there's always something. That's what human nature. But the thing is always, don't use God's name to justify your idiosyncrasies, your way of doing things. Okay? Because it's a grave sin when you look at that. And then 8, now we go into Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but the 7th day it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your manservant or your maidservant, or your cattle, or even the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. See, that's how important it is. Nobody works on Sabbath. We're not supposed to work on Sundays, okay? How that works, the way it works, yes.
When did we switch? Because obviously...
Resurrection.
Okay. Resurrection
We celebrate the day of resurrection. We celebrate the first day, the resurrection, day of the resurrection.
Okay. Because it used to be Saturday for
Yeah.
the Jews.
Yeah.
Okay.
It still is. Christians just decided, the church decided to celebrate because of the day of resurrection and new creation. That's what we celebrate more. but we're still supposed to make it holy.
Right.
Okay? And when you see that nobody works on Sunday, nobody works. That's why when you go to
Chick-fil-A, they don't work on
Well,
Sunday.
years ago, Publix
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 never
didn't
opened
open
on
on Sunday.
Yeah.
For many years. That's right.
well, when you go to Europe, Germany, you will have most of the stores closed on Sunday.
But when we were children in the same week,
Yeah.
most of us in the same boat. And I those in my boat, most things were closed on Sunday.
Right. But I think, I said, you don't have to go shopping on Sunday. Put it that way. Right? Make the holiday holy. Now it's online, right? No, the best example of that was the sporting events at Catholic schools. They play those games when? Saturdays and Sundays. And they complain, well, because no, Father, we need to compete and so on. I say, well, if nobody showed up, there will be no events on Sundays. As simple as it is. Why are you going? Right? You see, it's important to keep that because, again, school, I don't know, there's thousands of excuses. I know.
No, I'm just, okay, so is that working or is that playing?
That's resting your brain.
And or is playing good enough?
How we make the day holy.
Holy, yes.
Okay? People will not go to the church. People will not spend that day eating with their families. They will go to the games. They will do the other things. You see, I remember always on Sunday, it was always in my family, it was always the Sunday dinner. That was always the thing. And everybody knew better. You don't do anything, there's no watching TV, you sit down, you eat dinner on Sunday. There's only one day that we ate as a family. So that was special, but that was after the church. I went to church in the morning and then we had dinner, cooked dinner and so on. So how do we make the day holy? I think that's the whole idea. Because remember, God rests because God is saying, in resting, you become God-like. Because only animals don't rest. They work 7 days a week. Humans,
The rest.
But rest
Nowadays,
could also be
nobody-
play, right?
That's what I'm saying, resting your brain.
yeah, but that's why you see here, everybody should be resting. So even you animals shouldn't be put to work on Sunday, what they say. So that this Shabbat day is so important for the Jewish identity. Okay? So it's good to remember that because again, God wants us to be more like Him, not like animals, not like people who have nothing in their lives, just keep going and going and going. Rest is important. How do we rest? Right? Okay. Verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Again, this interesting, the word that they use in the land, they use the word the earth. They use Adama. Remember Adam and Adama in book of Genesis, earth and man. So the same word is so that the days might be long in the earth, on the earth for you. Why honor your father and mother? I always like the Dennis Prager, has best twist on that, because he says, did you notice that it doesn't say don't love your mother and father, it says honor them? Because sometimes our parents are difficult to love. And sometimes we are difficult to love. So what is here? You still need to honor them. I like that twist of Dennis Prager on that. I absolutely love that. See, it's about honoring. How do you honor your parents? How do you teach your children to honor you? They don't have to love you, but they have to honor you. So that's why the worst thing that can happen is when parents are becoming buddies to their children. They study in high school, all other things, especially, my mother is my best friend. No, I don't think so. She's not supposed to be your best friend. She may become your friend later on in life, but children, again, they need to learn first how to honor their parents. That's what I say.
Honor and love go hand in hand, sorry. I mean, honor and love.
I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying it could be difficult. Okay. Now, number 13. You shall not kill. That's a bad translation. Original said, you shall not murder.
Right.
Because killing in Bible is justified. Murder is not. What is murder? When you kill someone innocent. So the Bible is very clear. You shall not murder. That was later translation in 19th, 20th century that started doing you shall not kill.
Right.
Yeah. The original would be, you shall not murder. Okay. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, not covet your neighbor's wife, or his maidservant or maidservant. Let's look at that. So, committing adultery, you stealing another person's spouse. You're stealing. Sometimes the stealing will be translated as you shall not kidnap.
Actually, you might just be borrowing, not stealing.
Yes, but then you return damaged goods. But again, is it adultery? This is stealing another person's spouse. It's a stealing. You can steal possession. You can steal people. False witness. You're stealing someone else's reputation, or you stealing something from him by denying, by falsely accusing reputation, and so on. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. This is interesting because it doesn't have to do, later on we see that in the book of Leviticus and Numbers, with want to have something that other people have. To covet means I want exactly that house. I want exactly that car. I want that wife to be, that woman to be with me, or that man to be with me. So to coveting your neighbor's spouse is that particular person or thing. It's not in general, okay, well, I want to live better lives, I would love to drive Corvette, right, and things like that, although I won't because it's too low. But again, to want to improve your life is nothing wrong with. But coveting, that's what that person has. That's what is wrong. So again, respect other people's property, respect other people, and respect yourself. Because you can work for something better, but you cannot just be jealous of what your neighbor has and covet that. Okay. Now, with all the people perceived the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, mountains shaking, smoking, people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will hear, but let not God speak to us lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, again, do not be afraid, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before your eyes, that you may not sin. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You see, you need to understand that God is God and we are not. That's the fear of the Lord.
That's always bothered me, the word of the fear.
And sometimes,
No, I know of all things, and you know I'm a pain in the butt, but I know God is God and I am not. That's not an issue at all. But fear?
yeah.
I have a special relationship. Honor, yes, but fear?
Well, that's how it begins, your relationship. Because when you grow up as children, what you were taught, that you're going to be punished for that. Fear was part of the upbringing and so on. It's more, I would say, the word might be better, awe would be better than fear. But sometimes again,
okay.
Yeah. But sometimes we are, let's say, we realize that we are nothing before God, and that's could be fear. Yeah. So those are both, but fear, not of sense of I'm afraid of God, but I want to make sure that I keep God happy. It's like John and you, Jana.
I think it's a better thing. It's like not fear of God, but fear of the consequences.
Okay, I'm not.
That
that's
not doing what I'm supposed to do.
Fear is not.
Yeah, well, it is, it's like a happy wife, happy life, right? So, happy God, happy life. So, is that fear?
Let John fear me.
Okay, and then we go to sacrifices. So, building of the altar. So, you can make altar of the earth. And then it makes altar of stone. You shall not build it on hewn stones. Why? Just because God said so. That's simple. No tool can be put in to make those stones in the altar look nicer, because God said so. There's no, for many of those laws, the only reason is because God said so. And is that the fear of the Lord? Probably could be. Now, chapter 21. This is the great. That's a totally different approach to humanity. Now, These are the ordinances, mispat, which you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. You don't own people for life. This is more like indefinite servitude. So for 6 years, that person serves you because they are, accrue debt and they need to pay you back. At the 7th year, you let them go. You free them without any payment or anything like that. That's something that wasn't, again, in this country till, very recently, right? This slaves, what the whole Civil War was about that. But again, can we own someone for life? No human being should be owned for life. It's a respect for human life and human dignity. If he comes in single, he should go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife should go out with him. So that's the whole thing. And when he master gives him a wife, and she bears him a son or daughter, then that the wife and children shall be her masters, and he shall go out alone. But when he says, I love my wife, and I want to stay with my master, again, person can make choice to remain slave for life. But it's a very interesting custom that they do. What they do, he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him for life. So he goes in to the post and just stick it to the doorpost and said, okay, now you slave for life because you make that choice. So we as humans, we can make choice, but nobody can make that choice for ourselves. So selling a daughter as a slave, and usually what is happening here again, selling the young woman or the daughter as a slave, what was with intent for her to marry either the master of the house or his son later on. That's a custom that was part of Hebrew culture. But what is interesting, she was to be treated as a wife. She could not be treated as a slave, as a sex slave. She was to be treated with dignity as a wife. So this is something that is very, very special for the Hebrew, for the Torah. And then now we're going again to the sanctity of life when you look at that.
Father,
Yeah.
what we're reading here, because obviously the 10 Commandments were the first, but this seems like more like an elaboration or...
Yes.
So where does this come from?
Those are the 10 words that we receive, and now we have the whole Torah has 613 commandments. Okay?
So
613, and those are the ones. Some of them, because they all kind of regulate, let's say, the sanctity of life, but also the social life of Israel. Because if you keep all those laws, like with this, you have to leave your land after 7 years, you have to return your land after 50 years, you have to free the slaves. It's a very humane society in the midst of very violent world. Because even today we don't live by all those. If you have debt, student debt, you pay it for 30 years, 40 years. Well, there is no remission. See, that's why. So but that's what happened. So here is the forgiveness of debt. And we are slaves to banks for life, some people, right? Now, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. The only offense that is being punished by capital punishment is killing another human being. Okay? So this is part of it. But if he did not lay in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. So if it is not premeditated murder, that person should not die. They have so-called cities of refuge. They have to leave their homes, they have to live in the cities that were being designated in each of the tribes. They could not go back to their family, but also the family has no right to vengeance, to kill that person. So, but if man willfully attacks another to kill him, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. Now, this is interesting. Whoever strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. Again, honor your parents, honor your mother and mother. Whoever steals a man, whether he sells him or is found in possession of him, shall be put to death. Sanctity of human life. Okay? So, selling people into slavery and enslaving them, our Christian society didn't live by those laws for very, very long. Whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. That goes even farther. So it's not just striking, not just honoring, even, to curse at your parents, that should be put to death. Why? Well, they try to civilize those wild people. Well, those are savages living in the desert. They don't know much. Everything is, if you strike me, I can kill your whole family. And so on. All of a sudden, it's no, they are laws of conduct. And you also have to treat people with dignity. So you cannot even curse your parents. Why? Because cursing your parents, you're basically cursing God. That's later on the book of Leviticus will elaborate on that. That cursing your parents is like cursing God. Because God gave you life, your parents gave you life, that's why we need to honor them, and that's why we cannot curse them, okay? That's part of it. So when the men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone and his fist, but man does not die, then it's okay, we go through all those things. What is important here we go. Verse 23. Even if harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Lex talionis. Okay? That's what this last Sunday Jesus was talking about. But this whole idea, it's a very just law. Because you can someone, let's say, runs you over and you lose your leg. You cannot kill that person for that. You can only cut that person's leg. And the rabbis will say that usually it wasn't kept that much. It was more kept within the financial restitution. That was what was done. But this whole idea about you cannot overdo your vengeance. Because it's not about vengeance, it's about justice.
Yeah, but Jesus abandons.
Well, Jesus said you have to go even farther than that.
Right, and you have to turn the other cheek and the cloak and hope that.
Well, basically he's saying you cannot even in your mind commit those crimes, commit those things. The further civilization is kind of, Jesus was trying to civilize us a little more than they were at that time, because even today we don't keep that. That's so unfortunate. And then verse 26, if when men strike the eye of a slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go free for the eye's sake. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free for the tooth's sake. So imagine, no slavery, and you cannot abuse your slaves, even slaves. You have to free them if you damage them. Even if it's technically your own good, right? If you damage a slave, it's still a person, you need to let them free. So then, when the ox gores pen and man leaves the pit open, you can read all those things and so on, but those are very common. The lover. Okay, this is one. Chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So it's not just, I'm going to return back the money. No, you pay well over what it was. He shall make restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is donkey or sheep, he shall pay double. That always reminds me about the tax collector Zacchaeus, his name was. Remember him? Mm-hmm. When Jesus invites himself into his house, what does he say? Whomever I did charge over, I will pay double. So he is recognizing that he was stealing for the people. Because he is referring to this part. That if money is found on person, he shall be repaying double to the person from whom it was stolen. So that's what Matthew will be referring to. Okay. Then, verse 2, if the thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there should be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen upon him, there shall be blood guilt for him. This is basic law of self-preservation. If someone comes to steal your house at night, that person has let's say, intention to harm you. Not only to steal from you, but to harm you. That's for sure. But if he comes at the day, when you're not supposed to be home, then you have no right to kill that thief. So again, it's kind of trying to make more humane our human relationships. So we have the field and all that, fire, money, we can read that. Verse 16 of chapter 22. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give her marriage present for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses give it to her to him, he shall pay money equivalent to the marriage present for virgin. So you cannot just have sex all over the place, with young people, if you have sex with a virgin, meaning unmarried young woman, then you married her. Again, respect even for those who, even now, there is a, let's say, we see how that works. The women were always second-class citizens. Not anymore, but sometimes they were treated as that. Over a sudden, even this young woman has protection. Not only her father, but also the other ones. Verse 18, that's something good for us. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Okay? So no curanderos.
You're in trouble.
But why is that dangerous? Why is the sorcery dangerous? Because it's kind of, again, we see that, we live in Miami after all, it's all over the place. But the whole idea about sorcery is what? You try to control God. You try to control powers that you don't understand. And that's how people open themselves to possessions and other things. Because they open themselves and they try to manipulate powers that they cannot control, they cannot...
I think that the person that is engaged in this kind of activity is sort of taking a role as almost like a godlike role.
Yeah.
Right.
If I can control God, hey, I'm better than God.
Yeah.
Verse 19, whoever lies with a beast shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god, save the Lord only, shall be utterly destroyed. Now, verse 21, you shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. Again, protection of those who have nobody else to protect them. This is a patriarchal society. The husband dies and there is no children, there is male children that take over. And that poor woman, it's like what's happening in Afghanistan nowadays. They end up, going and selling themselves because they have nobody to take care of them. So here is this, you protect not only the stranger, but also the widow and the orphan. That the three groups that have nobody else to protect them, and the law should be applied to everybody in the land. And then the firstborn, laws concerning justice. 23 verse 2. You shall not follow a multitude to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a suit, turning aside after a multitude, so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his suit. So you cannot be partial either to the rich or to the poor. Justice has to be equal to all of the people. And you cannot follow the crowd. Only because crowd says that, let's say, what was a good example? Abortion is always a good example. Right? The majority of people in the country will say abortion should be allowed because that's it's okay to kill innocent. Doesn't mean that we should agree with that. Right? My mother always said, if your friends are going to jump out of the building, you're going to jump with them. So of course I will. It's like, that's the nature of the beast. But the whole thing is, don't follow the crowd blindly. Justice has to be done. And then again, now verse 4. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of the one who hates you lying under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall help him to lift it up. Again, challenge to overcome, this our base human, let's say, feelings. If you have someone who you hate, how many of you will help Biden up the escalator? Right? Or Trump, for that. The thing is, we should again be helpful even to our enemies. We should help them. Why? Because that way you can meet the person and they can meet person, and that hate could be changed into something different. So that's why they try to make those people a little more civilized. Again, verse 9, you shall not oppress a stranger. You know the heart of a stranger, for you a stranger in the land of Egypt. So meaning, usually they say that the abused becomes an abuser. Here is the breaking of the cycle. No, you don't become an abuser only because you were abused, because you know better. Sabbatical year, again, for 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its fields. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lay fallow, for the poor of your people may eat. And what they live, the wild beasts may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyards and with your olive orchard. 6th day you should work, and so on and so forth. Verse 13, take heed to all that I have said. So it has this custom that every 6 years they would not cultivate the land for a year. It was probably never kept, put it that way. It was commandment that was always they try to avoid doing because, again, what we're going to eat that year, right? Yeah, so this is agrarian society. Everything depends on what you pick up on your field. It's not like today we can, let's say I'm not going to work. I'm going to close my law firm for this year and see what comes by next year, right? So again, those are challenging laws. Those are challenging commandments. That's why they're more like, I would say, the vision of an ideal society than laws that people kept. Although most of them they did. And then annual feast, we have Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover, First Fruits, which is Shavuot, and the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year, which is Sukkot. Those 3 feasts, 3 times a year, what they said, 3 times in the year shall all you males appear before the Lord God. So every Israelite, 3 times a year, every man, will have to go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice in the temple. Why? Again, I remember what I told you last year. Men need reminders constantly. Women, they don't, but men do need. And again, when women stay at home, or when men go on pilgrimage, women at least have a couple of week off. They don't have to deal with their husbands, right? So there are other laws that are like that. That's, for my best example, I remember that was in Deuteronomy. When a woman gives birth to a child, when it's a man, it's a boy, then she is unclean for 40 days. When it's a girl, she's unclean for 80 days. And I remember once we were discussing in the classroom about that, I said, hey, which society will reward you with 80 days of you cannot do anything in the house, you have to take care of that baby? What's wrong with that? See, we look at it as something that is law that, I cannot do this. Those were laws that were protecting woman and a child. If she has a baby boy, she couldn't touch anything in the house for 40 days. She couldn't cook for her husband. There was no sex involved. She was protected because she was unclean. When there was baby girl, 80 days, even more, even better. So it has this 40 days that the woman can only concentrate only on that child. Nothing else was in her repertoire or her schedule. See, those are the laws that are very, very protective of the weak and women.
Does it make sense that the male being so placed in a higher position that only 40 days were dedicated to...
Hey, but baby girls need to be taken care more. That's woman needs to enjoy her daughter. So there is a reason to that. There is a way of, again, but those laws are made to protect. So we have almost the end.
Didn't they have concubine at that time?
Some people, but you see, Bible never promotes that. Bible, it's always, when you see in the Bible examples of families when you have husband and 2 wives or more wives, there's never a good outcome. Leah and Rachel.
Yeah.
Right? Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Sarah, and Hagar and all that. Every time, King David, King Solomon, every time when there is more than one woman involved with a man, there is trouble. And it's not the woman's fault. Usually it's the man that is at fault. But Bible is very, again, those are the customs of the culture at that moment. They try to limit them because they said you cannot marry, for example, a woman and her daughter, or you cannot marry cousin, or things like that. So they were limited with that. But they were still dealing with reality like slaves. Bible didn't say, okay, you cannot have slaves because nobody will work with that. But you have to let the slave go, and you have to give him day off. So you see, the kind of whoever was writing it was inspired enough to do things in a way that would be gentle for the society that would not understand the law otherwise. Okay, so let's finish.